Okay, so if everyone is ready, we can we can begin. So hello to everyone, both offline and here in our department. Yeah, and welcome to this second session of our Semiosalong, this series Unde venis et quo attendis, that I just remind, it means something like where do you come from and where are you going, which seems a very fitting title for this series on the history of linguistics and semiotics. And well, today we have two very nice presenters. First of them is Professor Rossana De Angelis, and she's an associate professor in language sciences at the University of Paris-Est Créteil. She's a member of the Centre d'études de discours, images, textes, écrits, communication. And her research focuses on the analysis of writings in relation to supports, formats, and practices of writing and publishing, both traditional and digital. And she uses semiolinguistic approaches to do this. Her first work, Il testo conteso, semiotiche ed ermeneutiche nella seconda metà del Novecento, reviews the main contemporary text theories, and she recently has made other very nice publications for Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Literature, and she co-edited the work Les Écritures confinées, which offers both an overview and a reflection on the writings produced during the pandemic lockdown. And I would also like to add that she has written many very important articles about this Geneva School of Semiology, of which she will be talking to us today. So her presentation is entitled Semiology as a Comparative Science of Institutions, from Saussure to the Geneva School of Semiology. And yes, please, Professor De Angelis.
Thank you very much, Professor Traves, for your invitation. I'm very glad to be here with you online, but in this very dynamic community of Saussurean studies and tradition, and to meet also some colleagues here online. I'm very happy to be with you here today. And I'll be present some sort of path in this history of linguistics theories, and I'll focus with on the notion of semiology as a comparative science of institutions, and we'll see together I mean by this. And I share a PowerPoint, and I could send you at the end of the intervention. So I'll share the screen. Okay.
Good.
I think it's okay.
Yes.
Okay. So if we read Saussurean text and students' note about Saussure's course, we say that the Saussurean notion of semiology is closely linked to that of institution. As we can read in the Cours de linguistique générale, I'll mention this in français, in French. It is up to the psychologist to determine the exact place of semiology. In fact, in Saussure's words, systems of science are social institutions. This is its expression. Sociality in an internal factor and an external one. So systems of science as institutions. Furthermore, the radically arbitrary character of linguistic science makes the difference between that particular semiology, which is the language, in Saussure words, la langue, and other non-linguistic systems, and so non-linguistic science. The particular semiology, which is the language, la langue, is a sort of a semiological fact apart. So the language is conceived as a special system in relation to the others in the set of semiological facts. As we shall see in later section of this intervention, the radical arbitrary character of linguistic science combined with their necessarily social nature explains the particular semiological life of language. These two internal criteria, that is to say, the particular nature of linguistic science and its inner sociality, support the idea of semiology as a science of culture, having as subjects all the institutions sharing the same cultural space with a particular language. As we can read in the critical edition of the Cours de linguistique générale, as you see on the screen, edited by Rudolf Engler, science systems are identified as institutions, as social institutions, as ritual institutions, as semiological institutions. There are all expressions which we can read in the critical edition of the Cours de linguistique générale. Nevertheless, the concept of institution is not present as such either in the Saussurean lexicon prepared by Godel, nor in that prepared by Engler, where it refers to the notions of language and semiology. That is to say, when we want to understand what's institution, we have to refer to the notion of language and semiology. So there is a circle between these two notions. These expressions attempt to create order in the set of facts subject to the semiological study. The set of human facts, of facts on language, and more specifically, linguistic facts as semiological facts. Language and other institutions are semiological institutions, as noted by Godel and Engler. But in the notes taken by Saussure students during this course in general linguistics, we can read about science systems as social institutions, that is to say, an expression as we can read in the Cours de linguistique générale, even if language is not similar to the other institutions, such as legal institutions, race, custom, etc., and so on. Indeed, there are important differences between language and the other institutions, and between this difference, there is the nature of the sign and the way to function in collectivity. Despite their differences, these systems of science share the same foundation, that is, the same social character. So, the notions of institution and semiology share a fundamental principle, the social nature of any semiological fact. According to Saussure, language, that is to say, not a social institution in all respects similar to the other ones, but it is distinguished by several features of other institutions, political ones, legal ones, religious ones, and so on. As recorded, here you have the citation, the quotation. Sorry, I just finished my lessons in French, so sometimes I speak in French. As recorded in Riedingler's notes and in Saussure and written sources, Whitney's work leads to us a more complex consideration of the relationship between language and other institutions. Saussure deals with institution in his handwritten notes identified as Cahiers Whitney, and his reflections come to the Cours de linguistique générale essentially from this notebook. We don't read all the quotation. I'll say I just sum it. That is to say, there is an essential difference between language as institution and the other systems of science considered as institution, and the essential difference is in the radically arbitrary character of linguistic sign. This the famous example of the word cow and vacca to designate a cow. This difference between language and the other institutions is at the foundation, sorry for that, okay, is at the base of the thought of Luis Prieto. So we are in the semiological school of Geneva, the thought of Prieto about theories of institutions, which is founded essentially in the Cours de linguistique générale and confirmed by Saussure's handwritten sources. That is to say, writing, a more precisely phonematic writing, as the alphabet, represents the only institution that can be considered analogous to language and led to understand its true essence, as it's mentioned here. Indeed, language and writing share the radically arbitrary character of the sign. This is very clear when we read the Cours de linguistique générale. This characteristic explains their process of institutionalization. Sorry. What arbitrariness allows, what it makes possible, it prohibits at the same time. And the irrationality introduces into the language, far from taking the form of a contact, takes the form of a constraint. It is the words of Christian Puech when he says that arbitrary in writing and in language, both considered as semiological systems, so as institutions sharing the same cultural space, becomes a sort of constraint and the same kind of constraint. So the radically arbitrary character of the signs represents the fundamental difference between language and other institutions sharing the same cultural space. I'll read this quotation. Whether it is the costume or it is always the natural relation of things which takes over after an extravagance and which remains through the ages, the guiding unit, which remains the rule through all the changes. This is connected to the previous passage. While language, to accomplish the function that comes back between the human institutions, is stripped of any limit in its processes, at least a limit that someone could have shown us. The absence of affinity from the beginning between being a radical thing, not a thing with the last bit of a nuance. It is by this that it happens subsequently that the language is not contained in a human rule, constantly corrected or directed, correctable or directable by human reason. This is the reason that detects the other institutions. The institution of marriage in the monogamous form is probably more reasonable than in the polygamous form. It can be discussed philosophically. But in the institution of any science, for example, C or S, to designate the son S, or cow or vaca to designate the idea of cow, is based on unreason itself. That is to say, there is no reason here based on the nature of things and the convenience which intervenes at any time, either to maintain or to suppress a rules of use. So I read this quotation because it is very important to identify the difference between institutions in the same space, in the same cultural space. The distinction between language conceived as an institution without analogues, if we join writing, as we said, as we remember, looking at Cahiers Whitney. So the distinction between language and the other institutions sharing with it the same cultural space requires us to evaluate their reciprocal relations. And it is possible only if semiology is considered as a comparative science of culture, so of cultural institutions, having as its objects all the institutions sharing the same cultural space. As Saussure says, language, la langue, is not subject to the continual correction of the mind, because it does not follow from the beginning a visible harmony between the idea and the means of expression. This remains a capital difference, despite all the external mirages, as he said, with respect to cases, for example, religious rituals, political forms, uses, and so on. We can read the distinction between language and writing, the only analogous institution which can we compare to the language. So we can read the distinction between language and writing and the other institutions as a distinction, respectively, between unreasoning institutions based on the radically arbitrary character of science, as we have read in the quotation, and reasoning institutions managed by a human rule, constantly directing or correcting them, so they are always dirigible and correctable by human reason. But it is not possible with language, is not possible with writing. In semiology, considered as a comparative science of institutions, reasoning and unreasoning ones can be studied in respect of their mutual relations because they contribute all together to produce practices, discourses, and text within which they leave traces. So the cours de linguistique générale lays the foundations of what we can be considered as the theory of institutions. If we take in count the link, this very strong link between the notion of institution, of semiology and the idea of institution. So, there is another aspect of this difference between language, writing, and the other institution. And there is the process of, it consists, we can see it looking at the process of institutionalization, that is to say, the process of becoming an institution, how a system of science becomes an institution in a cultural space. The relationship between language and writing becomes clearer when we take into account their modes of transmission. Linguistic communities are responsible for ensuring language transmission. They appear both as a plurality of individuals in the form 1 + 1 + 1, the collective model, and as a speaking mass, a supra-individual entity, as Saussure says in Le Cours de Linguistique Générale. Okay. Language are systems of activity whose external data, that is to say the social component, is stronger and prevails over the internal, voluntary, individual one. What is called intersubjectivity is nothing else than sociality stratified and recapitulated by languages with the situation of reciprocity found in the act of speech. In fact, the other institutions, for example, fashion, law, religion, already presuppose the mastery of a common language which guarantees this reciprocity, in which institutions are shared and assures their transmission in the history of human culture. So there is a difference between what happens in language, in which we already and always agree in using linguistic signs, and what happens in other institutions, which involve agreeing on their own functioning through language. These two sort of agreements are two different kinds of agreements. The agreement concerning language is unreasoning, is a spontaneous and unthinking adaptation to common linguistic usages adopted in the linguistic community, which in turn guarantees the individual and collective use of linguistic system and hence its institutionalization. This spontaneous and unthinking adaptation reminds us to the asemiotic concept of contagion, sort of contagion, developed to describe collective phenomena of spontaneous and unreasoning adaptation. But before a language can be reworked in the individual usages, before the reciprocity of the speech act can be recognized, it undergoes a process of institutionalization that is both unreasoning and social. Unreasoning because of the necessarily arbitrary character of linguistic science, we said it before. Social because of the necessarily collective nature of the acts of reproduction and transmission, as we said. Language is social or does not exist, like Saussure words. Language, to impose himself on the mind of the individual, must first have the sanction of the community. We know this position in the Code of the Linguistique Générale. The process of language institutionalization is based on this collective sanction, reiterating or not common linguistic usages. Saussure's ideas about institutions and institutionalization open up to more complex ideas of sociality and social proceedings to explain semiological phenomena. Among other institutions, language singularity depends on the arbitrary character of linguistic science, as we said, and on the nature of the agreement responsible for its transmission. Indeed, in language, we do not begin to agree about current linguistic usages, but we agree already and always because we are yet in a linguistic community. There is a passage of Riedingler, this is the second one, which is very clear about these two natures of agreement. I don't read the passage because it's a summary of what I'll say. So the first type of agreement, what we can say the agreement number one, we agree already and always in a linguistic community, means that we can always share a language and that it becomes a common language. Language, la langue, is the social part of language external to the individual who on his own cannot create or modify it. It exists only by virtue of a kind of contract between the members of the community. This is what we read in the Cours de Linguistique Générale. Its institutionalization depends on the nature of this contract, a spontaneous and unreasonable adaptation to current linguistic usages. Then, the mastery of a common language gives up to individuals, members of the same linguistic community, the opportunity to agree differently on other institutions. So, this represents a second kind of agreement, the agreement number two. That is to say, when we decide to agree or not and negotiate for it. So, if we summarize what we said, the link between semiological, the notion of semiology and the notion of institution, when we put these two notions together, can put us to differentiate different sorts of signs, which are the fundamental of different systems of science conceived as these institutions, and a different kind of social contract, that is to say, the different kind of agreement previous, which are considered as the previous step to the institutionalization of a system of science. I have 10 minutes or how much?
Yeah, you have even you have 10-15 minutes. Yeah.
10-15 minutes. Okay. Thank you. So I'll pass on the idea, the focus on writing, because as we said at the beginning, I work on writing and writing systems and writing text, written text, and this is something that it's very, very important for me, and because the idea of writing, which is the writing, the object of a very important reflection, thought, very important works written by Pietro, for instance, which is part of the semiological, which I call a semiological school of Geneva, and he says that he thinks about writing not as a secondary institution compared to language, but a sort of parallel institution through language. And that is to say, looking to the writing systems, we can better understand the linguistic ones. So there is a very interesting, but I would like to present the last part of my speech. It is to say that this idea of semiology as a comparative science of institutions is, for me, is a sort of base, a sort of fundamental step of collective reflection, which we can identify in different works and different contributions to what we can identify. I call the semiological school of Geneva. Why semiological, not linguistic? That is to say, is the reason to focus on this idea of semiology. What kind of idea of semiology is the social heritage in this in the Geneva School of Semiology? And I spoke about the Geneva School of Semiology in different articles, and I think that this idea of a semiology, a semiology like a sort of meta discipline, a meta discipline, I don't know, say better, is a sort of fundamental of different works and different authors. First of one, Eric Buissens. Eric Buissens, here there is a list, a short list of his works. His first contribution is the one, the work published as Language and Discourse, Langage et Discours, published in 1943. Here, Buissens sets out the propose a sort of continuity of the Saussurean project of semiology, conceived as a science which deals with science system, with different science systems within social life. That is to say, semiology considered as a science of different systems of science sharing the same cultural space, that is to say, considered as a comparative science of institutions. Buissens was considered from the beginning as the first true continuation of the Saussurean semiological project. His work is presented very often as undoubtedly the first methodical effort that we have attempted to found a semiology according to the direction traced by Saussure, and which is characterized by this idea of plurality. That is to say, we can identify the characteristic of each systems of science and different sort of science only if we compare different systems of science. Only if we place ourselves in a perspective as a semiology considered of a comparative science of system science. Of system science, no, two different. Within this lead, in this work, in its main works in Langage et Discours, Buissens defines semiology as the science, I quote Buissens, as the science which studies the processes to which we resort in order to communicate our states of consciousness and those by which we interpret the communication made to us. bringing for the social part of the way system science function, their function is very important. It's the first characteristic, the first thing to look for. And so it brings the first. It brings a very important, according a very important place and function to a very important place to the communicative function of the language. In this way, it places the language among other science systems to evaluate its specificities, and it's the only way you can, in this perspective, you can study each systems of science. The second one, the second I mentioned yet Prieto. The second one, the second author who I think places in these ideas of semiology size of institution is Luis Prieto. The concept of the influence of one subject to another, for example. So the social relationship between different subjects in their semiological relation is very important. And Prieto draws it from the work of Vicens. In addition, it defines communication as a social relationship between two people, which is carried out. They exchange indications about the type of social relationships, and we are always in this social preeminent part of semiology. We said we spoke about it in the first part, which directly refers to the definition of communicative act presented by Vicens, from whom he also draws the notion of sem and semic act, while regretting that he is the only semiologist to use these terms in this sense. Prieto therefore recognizes the theoretical effort of Vicens, which is carried out concretely in the establishment of a semiology of communication. In other words, a semiology which studies signs which are the same signals. He then takes the path opened by the author, but by broadening the field of studies to a different kind of science, and it is possible only in a comparative attitude to the systems of science, only in a semiology, supposing a semiology as a comparative science of institutions, that is to say, comparative science of systems of science. So in this reflection, in this thought, we know his famous distinction between a semiology of communication and the semiology of knowledge. And on the other hand, its purpose too is to, I quote a passage in Prieto, to establish the fundamental notions of the semiology of communication, conceived as an introduction to general linguistics as a basis for the semiology of meaning, an approach which will then be displayed as a semiology of connotation. So we have a sort of basic comparative approach which brings to a theoretical and theoretical distinction between different signs of differences of signs. Another protagonist of this semiological of the Semiological School of Geneva is Muna, because it takes up the directions opened by Vicens and Prieto. We can note his admiration for the two authors and their works in his reviews of Messages et Signaux, where Prieto is presented as the only linguistics, the only scientist who gave himself the task of constituting the semiology dreamed by Saussure, then sketched as sketched in Vicens' Langage et Discours. And in the review of communication of linguistic articulation in another work, he praises on this occasion, he deplores in this occasion the incuriosity which accompanied its publication, despite the importance. And this incuriosity and this astonishment depends on the idea of analyzing it is to say, to analyze systematically different system of signs in a comparative approach, in a comparative attitude. The last idea, the last protagonist. Sorry, I'm very tired because I began to teach this morning at 8 a.m. So I'm a little bit tired. The last protagonist of this history, I think, is Jean Martinet. Always for the but always for the comparative attitude to explain the semiological phenomenon. After devoting, she wrote a very important work of the 70s, Clé de sémiologie, de la sémiologie, and after devoting the first chapter to communication, she reworked the notion of channel, medium, signal, sign, coming from the sort of hybridation between a linguistic reflection and a sociological reflection on the phenomena of human communication. So Jean Martinet developed different semiological fundamental notions, and index, signal, icon, symbol, and devotes several pages to the question of the arbitrariness of sign, evoking the Saussurean notions of signifier, signified, same, sense, signification, value, referent, and so on. And she devotes the third chapter to the sign systems, taking up the distinction between language, langue, parole, code, system, writing, and so on. So the idea of I think that the idea of a semiology as a comparative science of institutions, as a comparative science of systems, is the fundamental idea which goes on, under and all the works of these authors. So I simplified very much to go from the idea of the connection between semiology and institution, the idea to be in a comparative attitude to analyze the specific, the specific characteristics of systems of science and the social aspect of the institutionalization, to go to the semiological school of Geneva, and to show you that this idea, which is not explicitly formulated that semiology as a comparative science of institution, is on the fundamental, is at the base of the works of these authors. And I'll send you the PowerPoint. You have the different texts, Saussure's text quoted, the notes, the different texts quoted by the creator's text quoted, and if you want, different articles in which I explained, I think, better this reflection about semiology as a comparative science of institution, with more details and more precisely. And I thank you very much for your patience and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Quite on the contrary. Quite on the contrary. Thanks to you. And okay, so we have some time for questions. If there are questions from the audience here or online. We have a question here. Okay.
Hello, good evening, Professor De Angelis. Thank you very much for your lecture. It was full of information for us, and I wanted to ask you more about the relationship between language and writing, because we have a project on this topic, and many people in this room actually are part of it. So I just learned that Prieto wrote on the topic. I didn't know, so I will definitely read more Prieto. But I also saw in your bibliography that you have papers on the topic. So if you could share with us, I will be very happy. And if you can briefly comment on this, thanks.
Thank you so much for your question, and sorry to switch on the on the writing, but it's very interesting to compare the writing system to the linguistic system, because we have soon some difficulties, which the first one is which system of writing can we consider, because the alphabetic one, the system writing as a system of phonogram, of phonetic signs, and a writing system based on logogram, that is to say, signs functioning differently, put us in two different attitudes. So the first thing is to identify what system of writing concerns the Saussure, this reflection. And there is the alphabetic one, and the alphabetic one is based on the idea of arbitrariness. So it is partially it is similar, parallel to the linguistic one, but we can for instance we can doubt on the typographical system, which is added to writing as a sort of additional system. if we accord attention to the typographical system, we have to nuancer. I don't know as I have to say this in English. We have to doubt of this strong arbitrariness, because there are some different signs which functions on the sort of iconic reason. So it's very difficult to summarize the parallelism or the differences between linguistic systems and between writings in general and the linguistic system, because we have to select what kind of writing system we choose, and to look all the different aspects of these writing systems and how we appropriate this one. That is to say, how we use with which, for instance, which systems of signs we add to this to use this in our cultural space. So I'll share all the text. My article is very with pleasure. Yes, don't worry. So and I'll be here if you want to speak again and speak further. I'll be here. Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the audience here or online? Maybe someone there. Not. I have a very quick question, which is sort of just about the name. Yeah, about terminology, let's say. So about the name of Geneva School of Semiotics, because I have referred to the same group, but rather as functional semiologists, or so just I think it's just putting the stress in a little bit of different, but not so different aspect, because yeah, I think that what they all had in common is precisely this emphasis on institutions, but which is at the end this emphasis on language as being primarily a tool for communication, and thus like this function. So yeah, I wanted to ask why to call it semiology, like the Geneva School of Semiology, and what is the relation between them and this other group, which is sometimes called like a semiology of signification, or what Barth and other people were doing. Maybe Metz or Kristeva could be put in that other group. And so how do you see this difference? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your question, which is a very, very important question. I doubt very much when I had to identify especially in in English, the Geneva School of l'école sémiologique de Genève, ou l'école de, c'est plus, it's easier to identify in French, because we don't see the clash between between different schools, and it's I know I know there is this difficulty. I think that there is two big differences between this school of semiology, and I use the term semiology to take the connection directly to Saussure, and two characteristics. The first one is the connection to the linguistic science, as the linguistic systems, as you said, because there is a sort of there is a primarily thought of linguistic science, of linguistic systems. Language is always present when working on other system of science. And I think there is a very, very important characteristic of this school. And the idea is that it's not far from the Geneva School of Linguistics, because there is the field, no? The field of reflection. And the second one, I think there is a very important focus on systems and not on text. And I think there is an important difference with for instance, the Paris School of Semiotics, because in Paris School of Semiotics, for instance, there is a very important, the focus is on text, how text works, and the text as the intermediate object of analysis. That is to say, the object we see to understand the systems, but also the object we analyze to understand la parole, the act, the communicative art. And I think that the stress and the focus on the systems is typical, is very, very characteristic of the Geneva School. We want to, when we read their works as a Prieto, Sans, Martinet, I think the question is the fundamental question is how it works. That is to say, how this institution works. And there is a sort of they are looking to the systems and passing through text, but the objective is to understand how it works. And there, I think there is the sort of difference of they are not looking the same object. There's not the same question. I think, and this is my way, but I think there is only one way to differentiate these different schools, but it's my way to differentiate this there is no better there are only two different approaches to semiological phenomena.
Yeah, I actually I would